The sea, on a winter's night, possesses an almost otherworldly power to mute the world around it. Above the churning surface of the vast Pacific, a pale half-moon hung in the frigid sky, its ethereal light casting a delicate, shimmering trail of silver across the endless swells. Each colossal wave rose and fell with an ancient, relentless rhythm, a pulse that seemed utterly eternal, completely indifferent to the savage global conflict then raging across continents, decimating nations and reshaping the very fabric of human existence. There was no sound to be heard, save for the whisper of the wind as it swept over the water. And even that was a mere phantom, a ghostly sigh that seemed to vanish into the immense emptiness. For any weary sailor standing watch on the deck of a Japanese destroyer that fateful night, the scene might have appeared deceptively peaceful, an almost tranquil reprieve from the relentless brutality of war. But beneath that shimmering, serene skin of the ocean, an unseen predator, a silent, deadly hunter, was patiently waiting. This lurking shadow was the USS Archerfish, a Below-class submarine, a formidable vessel of the United States Navy. She was a leviathan of steel, 311 feet of meticulously welded plates, painted in a dull, muted gray that was designed to blend seamlessly with the abyssal depths and the twilight surface. Her conning tower, a stark, angular silhouette against the moonlit sea when she dared to break the surface, was little more than a fleeting shadow. Her periscope and radar antenna, the vital eyes and ears of the hunter, barely dared to breach the horizon when she remained submerged. Just enough to gather crucial intelligence before sinking back into the profound secrecy of the deep. Inside her robust pressure hull, the air hung thick and heavy, a claustrophobic blend of stale oil, the pervasive tang of sweat, and the insistent mechanical hum of her intricate machinery. Within this steel cocoon, men moved with an almost preternatural quietness, their movements precise and economical around the complex array of valves, gauges, and plotting tables. Their voices were hushed to barely audible whispers, their collective concentration an absolute, unwavering force. These men had been at war for what felt like an eternity, years of relentless combat, endless patrols, and the constant gnawing threat of death. Yet, in this particular moment, something felt fundamentally different. An almost palpable tension hung in the air, a premonition that something truly monumental, something history-altering was about to unfold. At the very heart of this unfolding drama stood Commander Joseph F. Enright, a man barely in his early 30s, with piercing dark eyes that seemed to carry the weight of untold experiences, and a reputation that, until very recently, had been decidedly uncertain, even tarnished. He had, regrettably, tasted the bitter tang of failure before. On an earlier command, a patrol that haunted his memory, he had found himself paralyzed by hesitation at crucial life-or-death moments. He had returned from that arduous patrol without firing a single torpedo, a truly devastating outcome for a submariner in wartime. Such a patrol was more than merely disappointing. It was, in the unforgiving culture of the submarine service, considered utterly shameful. The unspoken verdict was clear. He had failed his crew, his duty, and himself. Enright had even taken the drastic step of requesting to be relieved of his command, convinced that his instincts, the very core of a successful submarine commander, had irrevocably failed him. He carried the deep, invisible scar of that past experience into every single decision he made now, a constant reminder, a haunting specter of doubt. Tonight, in these black, fathomless waters south of Honshu, the main island of Japan. He was utterly determined to redeem himself. Enright stood at the periscope, his left hand resting lightly on its cold, metallic grip, his right fingering a rosary, a small string of beads, in his pocket. He was a devout Catholic, and while he wasn't overtly pious in his daily demeanor, he found a profound, quiet comfort in that simple string of beads when the crushing weight of responsibility, and tonight that responsibility was heavy indeed, pressed down upon him. Tonight, somewhere far to the north, beyond the rugged headlands that guarded the entrance to Tokyo Bay, an enormous Japanese vessel, a behemoth of steel, was purposefully moving through the darkened waters. The radar operator, a young man with nerves of steel and an even keener eye, had called out the initial contact first. Just a blip on his flickering screen, a mere 12 miles away, but undeniably large and steady on a southwest course. The contact was unmistakably, unequivocally massive, and Enright knew, deep in his bones, with an instinct honed by years of war, that this was no ordinary freighter, no common merchant vessel. This was something far, far greater. The burning question, the one that gnawed at the edges of every man's mind in the control room, was simple yet terrifying. What was it? The archerfish had been assigned to lifeguard duty earlier that evening, a mundane task of waiting to rescue downed American airmen from bombing raids that, due to capricious weather conditions, had ultimately never launched. Now, free to roam and hunt, she had inadvertently stumbled across a prize, a potential target of unimaginable significance, though no one aboard yet truly grasped its full, staggering magnitude. Enright's thoughts, driven by a mixture of apprehension and grim determination, immediately turned to the legendary Japanese battleships, the colossal Yamato and Musashi, true leviathans that had, for a time, shaken the very foundations of naval power across the Pacific. Musashi had met her spectacular, violent end at Leyte Gulf just weeks earlier, hammered into submission by relentless waves of American bombers, a testament to the new age of naval warfare. Could Yamato herself, the ultimate symbol of Japanese might, be venturing out? Or was this something even stranger, something entirely new, a desperate, final throw of the dice from a dying empire? The submarine shuddered almost imperceptibly as she subtly adjusted her course, a silent beast honing its path. In the control room, men bent with an intense focus over the plotting board, their faces grim in the dim light, meticulously tracing the intricate lines of relative motion, making minute critical adjustments to bearings with grease pencils. They worked with a quiet, practiced urgency, a shared understanding that in this deadly game of hide-and-seek, timing, and geometry were not just crucial. They literally meant the difference between life and death. A single mistake here would not only mean losing the elusive target, allowing it to slip back into the protective anonymity of the night, but could also invite swift, devastating destruction from the destroyers that undoubtedly screened such a colossal vessel. For now, however, the archerfish maintained her cautious distance, shadowing on the surface, using the profound darkness and the thin, ragged edge of an overarching cloud cover to cunningly hide her telltale silhouette. Inside the submarine, life was a tense, tightly coiled spring, but it was also remarkably disciplined. The crew had, through years of arduous experience, long since learned to live, work, and even thrive in the incredibly tight, confined quarters of their steel tube. Torpedo men, their lives inextricably linked to their weapons, slept literally alongside their deadly ordnance in the forward room, a stark testament to the intimacy of their profession. Officers, without exception, shared bunks, rotating in shifts as sleep became a precious, fleeting commodity. Every single man, from the greenest recruit to the most grizzled veteran, knew his station by instinct, his movements a symphony of learned efficiency. The air carried a constant, low hum, a pervasive backdrop of sound composed of whirring fans, pumping machinery, and the low, guttural murmur of the diesels when the submarine was surfaced, gulping in the night air. Men wore sweat-stained coveralls, their bodies glistening in the muggy, unventilated compartments. Some, seeking any respite from the oppressive heat, stripped down to their undershirts. On nights like this, with the stakes so incredibly high, heightened nerves magnified every single sound. The subtle, almost organic creak of the hull as the immense pressure of the sea pressed in, the rhythmic slap of waves against the bow, the faint, almost hypnotic buzz of the radar screen. Each sound, no matter how minor, was amplified by the crushing weight of expectation, and Enright, acutely aware of his past demons, was absolutely not about to let expectation once again transform into crippling hesitation. He had made that ironclad resolution months earlier, while sitting across a battered poker table at Midway Naval Base, a temporary oasis of relative calm in a storm-tossed world. A senior officer, observing Enright's remarkably aggressive bluffing style, had leaned back and, with a knowing look, had asked him, "Joe, would you command a submarine the way you play cards?" Enright's answer had been simple, direct, and unhesitating. Yes. That answer, bold and uncompromising, had bought him another precious chance, a shot at redemption that few in the submarine service were ever granted. Now, at the periscope, with the fate of hundreds hanging in the balance, that second chance was about to be put to the ultimate, grueling test. What Enright, peering through the lens into the inky blackness, could not yet possibly know was the truly staggering scale of what lay before him. The ship he was relentlessly stalking, this elusive, gargantuan shadow, was the Shinano, the undisputed pride of the Japanese shipyards, a monument to a nation's desperate ambition. At an astonishing 71 ton, 190 tons when fully loaded, she was not just a large vessel. She was, by an enormous margin, the largest aircraft carrier the world had ever conceived or seen. She had been completed under a cloak of impenetrable secrecy, commissioned just a mere few days earlier, and sent into the perilous night with a skeleton crew, severely lacking in adequate training, and with many of her critical systems frustratingly unfinished, untested, or entirely non-functional. She was intended to be a potent symbol of Japanese strength, a defiant, unyielding fist shaken in the face of an encroaching enemy. Instead, she was steaming, completely oblivious, directly toward a single, unassuming submarine commanded by a man who yearned for redemption with a desperate intensity equal only to the Japanese Navy's desperate need for an unimaginable miracle. The moon, as if in league with fate, slipped briefly behind a thick veil of clouds, momentarily plunging the horizon into even deeper, more profound darkness. In that fleeting moment, the men aboard the Archerfish felt the vast ocean around them grow even quieter, as though the very sea itself was holding its breath, anticipating the unfolding drama. Enright, his heart pounding in his chest, leaned into the periscope's eyepiece once more, his eye fixed on the barely discernible shapes in the distance. The silhouette, though still faint and indistinct, was undeniably there, an immense, looming presence on the edge of visibility. He could now clearly discern the escorts, those smaller, darker smudges cutting briskly through the water, diligently circling the main, colossal vessel. Suddenly, a destroyer turned sharply, its bow slicing through the waves as it raced directly toward them, its presence a stark, terrifying threat. For one agonizing instant, it seemed with chilling certainty that the hunter had become the hunted, that their brief, precarious advantage had been violently snatched away. Then, inexplicably, miraculously, the destroyer sheared off, its captain apparently confused or uncertain, wheeled back with a spray of foam, and resumed its diligent station alongside its gargantuan charge. The precious, fleeting chance, against all odds, remained. Enright, his voice a calm but firm whisper that belied the roaring tension within him, murmured to his officers, "Stay with her. Let her zig. We'll find where she straightens out." His words, though simple, carried not just critical orders, but a profound promise. A promise to himself, a solemn vow to his men, and a desperate plea to his flagging career. He would not hesitate this time. This time, he would trust his deeply honed instincts. This time, he would strike. The relentless clock continued its inexorable march toward midnight. Somewhere ahead, through the oppressive, inky blackness of the night, the largest warship ever conceived by human hands moved with a deceptive serenity, utterly unaware that far beneath the seemingly calm surface of the sea, a lone submarine and her fiercely determined captain had locked her firmly in their sights. The stage was meticulously set, the deadly, high-stakes game of patience, intricate geometry, and an unforgiving fate had irrevocably begun. The year was 1944, and the seemingly unstoppable tide of the Second World War had turned with a cataclysmic force that was now undeniable, even to the most fervent optimists in Japan. For the Empire of Japan, a once expansive dominion that had stretched with audacious ambition from the frozen, desolate illusions of the far north to the steaming, oppressive jungles of Burma in the south. The war was no longer about glorious expansion, about conquering new territories. It had become, with a brutal, stark clarity, a desperate, last-ditch struggle for sheer survival. The Empire, battered and bruised, stood squarely on the defensive, its formidable military machine reeling from relentless assaults from the air, its vital lifelines strangled at sea, and its precious manpower bleeding out in a futile defense of its outer island fortresses, each a stepping stone for the relentless American advance. The vast, seemingly boundless Pacific Ocean, which had once served as an impenetrable moat, a formidable natural barrier protecting the sacred Japanese home islands, had, with terrifying swiftness, transformed into a sprawling, brutal battlefield that shrank ominously with each passing, blood-soaked month. American forces, demonstrating an almost terrifying efficiency and strategic brilliance, had leaped relentlessly from island to island, a systematic, inexorable advance known as island hopping. The Solomons, the Gilberts, the Marshalls, and then the Marianas. Each agonizing step brought U.S. forces closer and closer to Japan's vulnerable heartland. With every successive landing, the beleaguered Japanese military was forced to fight from an increasingly weaker, more untenable position. Its resources stretched precariously thin, its vital supplies dwindling with alarming rapidity, and its once unshakable morale steadily sinking into the depths of despair. By the blistering summer of 1944, the Philippines campaign, A critical strategic objective had already begun in earnest. General Douglas MacArthur, true to his famous resounding promise, had indeed returned. His battle-hardened troops were relentlessly battling their way through Leyte and beyond, while the formidable Admiral Chester Nimitz, a strategic genius, meticulously directed the immense fleets of the U.S. Pacific Navy in a steady, unstoppable march toward the final, climactic showdown at Okinawa. The oceans themselves, once the proud domain of the Imperial Japanese Navy, had now become hostile, treacherous waters for Japanese shipping. Once, the Imperial Navy had projected an unparalleled dominance over those vast strategic waters, its formidable warships ruling supreme. But now, it was American submarines, these silent, unseen hunters, that had wrested control beneath the waves. These silent service boats were proving devastatingly effective, a constant gnawing threat that Japanese naval strategists simply could not counter. Submarines like the Archerfish had, with relentless efficiency, cut Japan's vital merchant fleet to ribbons, effectively severing the empire's economic arteries. Tankers, laden with desperately needed oil from the East Indies, were going down faster than the struggling Japanese shipyards could possibly replace them, choking off the lifeblood of their war machine. Cargo ships, carrying essential food, desperately needed weapons, and crucial raw materials, were becoming easy, vulnerable prey for these patient, persistent submarines, armed with their deadly torpedoes and an unwavering resolve. By 1944, Japan had already lost more than half of its entire merchant fleet, and the resulting shortages were not merely inconvenient. They were becoming crippling, threatening to bring the entire war effort to a grinding halt. Factories, starved of raw materials, slowed their production to a crawl. Vital fuel reserves ran critically short, and even the most basic supplies, once taken for granted, grew frighteningly scarce. The brutal, unforgiving mathematics of war had, with devastating finality, turned irrevocably against Japan. Where once the mighty empire could, with relative ease, replace its losses in ships and aircraft, now each and every vessel sunk was an irreplaceable blow, a wound that festered and could not be healed. The great shipyards that had, with such pride and prodigious output, produced the formidable fleet which had so audaciously struck Pearl Harbor, were now struggling desperately just to patch up damaged vessels, let alone construct new ones from scratch. Steel, the very backbone of their industrial capacity, was critically scarce. Skilled workers, once the envy of the world, had been forcibly drafted into the increasingly desperate military, and American bombing raids, precise and devastating, were beginning to systematically target Japan's industrial centers, hammering its war-making capacity into dust. Above the waves, the grim situation for Japan was no better, offering no respite from the relentless pressure. The U.S. Navy had, with astonishing speed and logistical prowess, assembled the most powerful carrier strike groups ever witnessed in the annals of naval warfare. The fast carriers of the formidable Third and Fifth Fleets ranged freely and unchallenged across the vast Pacific, their seemingly endless waves of aircraft pounding Japanese bases with impunity, and even striking the sacred home islands themselves, a profound psychological blow. The skies over Japan were, quite simply, no longer safe. The mighty Boeing B-29 Superfortress, a technological marvel with its immense range and devastating bomb load, had begun relentless daylight bombing runs against Japan's vulnerable cities. Tokyo and Nagoya, once bustling metropolises, burned fiercely under their destructive firestorms, And the horrifying truth was that even more raids were relentlessly coming. An unstoppable aerial onslaught. The Imperial Japanese Navy, once the most modern, formidable, and feared force in the Pacific, was now a pale, tragic reflection of its former glorious self. Its elite air arm, once renowned for its skill and daring, had been almost entirely decimated at the pivotal Battle of Midway in 1942, a loss from which it never truly recovered. Its once invincible battleships had been bloodied and scarred in the brutal campaigns of the Solomons and the Marianas, and at the colossal Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, the largest naval engagement in recorded history, Japan had, in a desperate, last-gasp gamble, thrown everything it had left into the fray. The result was an unmitigated disaster. Carriers like the Zuikaku, a venerable veteran of the Pearl Harbor attack, were summarily sunk. The mighty battleship Musashi, a sister ship of the Yamato, was destroyed under the relentless, overwhelming waves of American bombs and torpedoes, a testament to the new era of aerial supremacy. And though Yamato herself, the largest battleship afloat and a symbol of national pride, had miraculously survived the encounter, she had been severely damaged and forced to retreat in disgrace. The human cost, beyond the staggering material losses, was equally devastating, and perhaps even more crippling. Japan's experienced pilots, the highly skilled aviators who had executed the Pearl Harbor attack with such audacious precision and devastating effect, were nearly all dead. Their invaluable expertise lost forever. Their replacements were hastily trained, often with less than 50 hours of flight time in their logbooks before being cruelly sent into the meat grinder of combat, barely knowing how to fly, let alone fight. American pilots, by stark contrast, arrived at the front lines with hundreds of hours of rigorous training, seasoned and ready for the brutal reality of aerial warfare. The result was nothing short of a slaughter in the skies. Japanese aircraft were being shot down at horrific ratios of 10.1, sometimes even worse, a suicidal exchange. Japan was running out of precious time, running out of vital ships, and, most crushingly, running out of viable options. Yet, even in this truly desperate existential situation, the beleaguered nation clung with a fierce, unwavering tenacity to one last fragile hope, that a powerful, revolutionary new weapon could, if only for a fleeting time, shift the impossible balance of power. That weapon was not another colossal battleship, nor a groundbreaking new aircraft design that would magically restore air superiority. It was, instead, a ship unlike any the world had ever seen, a carrier so gargantuan, so incredibly heavily armored, and so utterly secret that the Allies had absolutely no confirmation it even existed, treating whispers of its construction as mere propaganda or exaggerated rumor. Her name was Shinano, named after an ancient, revered Japanese province, and she was born from the very hull of a Yamato-class battleship, a pedigree of unprecedented power. She was intended to be untouchable, a veritable fortress at sea, an impregnable bastion of imperial might. Japanese planners, desperate for a decisive edge, fervently believed that if this colossal carrier could be completed and somehow put into action, she might serve as the anchor for their defensive line, a formidable barrier around the home islands. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could carry enough aircraft and, more critically, enough of the new, terrifying special attack weapons to blunt the relentless American advance, to inflict such unacceptable casualties that it might even threaten the invasion fleets that were, with chilling certainty, surely coming. The strategic thinking that underpinned the very concept of the Shinano eloquently reflected Japan's rapidly evolving, increasingly desperate doctrine. No longer could the Imperial Navy realistically dream of decisive, glorious fleet battles, where superior training and cutting-edge equipment alone would unequivocally prevail. Instead, they required a ship that possessed the unique capacity to survive the overwhelming American air attacks, to serve as a mobile, floating base for critical aircraft repair in the midst of battle, and, crucially, to deliver the grim new suicide weapons that were rapidly becoming the grim, central pillar of Japanese strategy. The terrifying Oka rocket-powered kamikaze planes, aptly nicknamed Baka bombs by the Allies, and the Shinoyo explosive motorboats represented a grim, horrifying calculation. That precious Japanese lives could be traded for valuable American ships at what they desperately hoped would be favorable, if ethically abhorrent, ratios. But even as Japan poured every ounce of its dwindling resources into building her, the brutal realities of war pressed in with an unrelenting, suffocating force. Shipyard workers, exhausted and demoralized, toiled in grueling shifts that stretched for an agonizing 16 hours or even more, their bodies pushed beyond human limits. Materials, once abundant, were now critically scarce, forcing painful compromises. Quality control, once a hallmark of Japanese craftsmanship, slipped alarmingly, a subtle but fatal erosion. Deadlines, arbitrary and unrealistic, loomed like an executioner's axe. The Shinano's completion was not merely expedited, it was ruthlessly rushed, so much so that vital, non-negotiable safety tests were dangerously skipped, deemed an unnecessary luxury in the face of existential threat. The Empire, teetering on the brink of collapse, needed this ship, and it needed her now, with an almost frantic desperation. In the hallowed halls of power in Tokyo, leaders clung tenaciously to increasingly fragile illusions. If Shinano could somehow steam to sea with a full operational air group, they fantasized, she might bring down swarms of B-29s, turning the tide of the air war. If she could somehow sail to the Philippines, she might, just might, disrupt MacArthur's meticulously planned landings, buying precious time. If she could simply appear, a ghostly, majestic presence, off Okinawa or Formosa, her mere formidable presence, they deluded themselves, might shake American confidence, instill doubt where there was none. The war, an unstoppable, unforgiving torrent, was undeniably slipping away. But perhaps, just perhaps, one magnificent, colossal ship could, against all odds, slow the inevitable, stave off utter defeat. Yet, desperation, no matter how profound, is a poor, fleeting substitute for genuine, enduring strength. Japan was already resorting to measures that, in their very nature, profoundly betrayed how dire, how utterly hopeless the situation had truly become. The kamikaze corps, those grim, suicidal squadrons, were not a sign of audacious strength, but rather a chilling, irrefutable admission of fundamental weakness. A horrifying confession that conventional warfare, for Japan, was no longer a viable option. Young pilots, many of them barely out of their teens, still boys in men's uniforms, were being tragically told that their highest, most honorable service to the Emperor was to die, to ram their aircraft, loaded with explosives, directly into American ships, a horrific sacrifice. It was a strategy born purely of profound despair, thinly dressed in the lofty, often manipulated language of honor and duty. The vast seas surrounding Japan were, by this late stage of the war, no longer friendly, no longer a sanctuary. American submarines, emboldened and relentless, hunted the coasts without mercy. Wolf packs of 3 or 4 boats would expertly coordinate devastating attacks on convoys, sinking escorts and merchantmen alike with grim efficiency. In late November, as the Shinano was frantically prepared to leave her heavily guarded shipyard, dozens of these silent, deadly submarines lurked menacingly in the approaches to Tokyo Bay, an unseen, lethal gauntlet. They had meticulously divided the vast waters into precise patrol zones, each boat responsible for its specific sector, all diligently reporting contacts to a central command to coordinate devastating interceptions. Most of these submarines would never even know that the Shinano, the greatest ship ever built, existed, let alone patrolled these waters. But one would, by the cruelest twist of fate, and that single unforeseen encounter would irrevocably decide her destiny. The broader strategic picture, to any objective observer detached from the suffocating propaganda and desperate nationalism, was chillingly clear. Japan had, without a shadow of a doubt, lost the war. The only questions that agonizingly remained were precisely how much longer the brutal fighting would senselessly continue, and how many more countless lives would be tragically lost before the inevitable, crushing end finally arrived. But for those caught inextricably in the relentless, grinding machinery of war, the stoic sailors, the exhausted shipbuilders, the terrified pilots, such detached clarity was an impossible luxury, an intellectual exercise they could not afford. They continued to fight with a fierce, almost blind tenacity, to build with desperate, failing strength, and to hope against all rational evidence, because the alternative, the utter, complete, and shameful surrender, was, for them, utterly unthinkable. By November 1944, Japan was an empire under an unprecedented existential siege. Its vast, once proud seas were patrolled relentlessly by unseen predators. Its skies burned fiercely, illuminated by the hellish glow of firebombs. Its once thriving cities trembled under the terrifying certainty of impending invasion. Into that inferno of a storm sailed Shinano, a colossal, magnificent ship, utterly unready, dangerously untested, and burdened beyond measure with the crushing weight of a desperate nation's last, fading hopes, and patiently waiting for her, unseen and unheard in the profound darkness of the night, was a single, determined submarine, commanded by a man who, perhaps more than anyone else, was desperately seeking his own personal redemption. Every truly great warship, a monument to human ingenuity and ambition, begins its life as nothing more than a series of intricate drawings on paper, a meticulous collection of lines on a detailed blueprint that promises astonishing steel, unimaginable power, and an aura of national prestige. The monumental story of Shinano, the largest warship ever built, began in precisely that modest, conceptual way. But her destiny, a cruel twist of fate, would be violently reshaped not once, but several times, long before her mighty keel ever truly touched salt water. She was originally conceived in 1940, at the very zenith of Japanese naval ambition, as the third of the fabled Yamato-class battleships, vessels that pushed the very boundaries of naval engineering. These warships were not merely intended to be large. They were to be, without question, the largest, heaviest, and most incredibly heavily armed battleships ever constructed by mankind. Their design imperative was clear: to unequivocally outmatch anything that floated in the formidable American or British fleets, to utterly dominate any potential opponent. Their armor was painstakingly designed to be thicker, their colossal guns larger and more destructive, their overall displacement simply staggering. They were not just weapons of war. They were living, breathing symbols of an ambitious empire that, in its hubris, sought undisputed dominance of the world's oceans. A Pax Japonica. The Yamato class eloquently represented a profound, deeply ingrained philosophy of naval warfare that dated back many decades, a strategic conviction that bordered on an almost religious belief. Japanese strategic thinkers, acutely aware that their island nation could never hope to match the sheer, overwhelming industrial capacity of the United States, firmly believed in the doctrine of qualitative superiority. Their logic was stark. If Japan could not, for reasons of resource and industry, build more ships than America, then it would, with unparalleled ingenuity and craftsmanship, build demonstrably better ships. Each Yamato-class battleship, they posited, would be so superior, so invincible, that it would be worth 2 or even 3 of its American counterparts, a singular, decisive weapon that would turn the tide. Their monstrous 18.1-inch guns, the largest ever mounted on a warship, could strike targets with pinpoint accuracy at ranges where enemy vessels simply could not hope to respond, effectively neutralizing them before they could even engage. Their incredibly thick, meticulously designed armor, an engineering marvel, was envisioned to shrug off shells that would utterly shatter and sink lesser ships, rendering them virtually immune to conventional attack. 2 of her storied sisters, the legendary Yamato and Musashi, were indeed completed to that formidable original design, each mounting 9 immense guns, veritable cannons capable of hurling shells weighing nearly 3,000 pounds farther, and with more destructive, pulverizing power than any naval artillery that had ever preceded them. These terrifying shells, once fired, could penetrate an astonishing 16 inches of hardened armor, at ranges exceeding a staggering 25 miles, a truly unprecedented feat of engineering and ballistics. Shinano's keel, the very foundation of her existence, was laid down at the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, one of the Empire's greatest, most revered shipyards, with every fervent expectation that she would follow her 2 formidable sisters into the vast, turbulent Pacific as yet another floating fortress, an unyielding bastion of naval might. The initial construction began with all the appropriate pomp, solemn ceremony, and immense national pride. Shinto priests, revered spiritual figures, blessed the very ground where her colossal form would majestically rise. The emperor himself, the divine head of the nation, was personally informed of the top-secret project, emphasizing its critical importance. The finest, most resilient steel available was meticulously allocated. The most experienced and skilled shipbuilders in the entire empire were carefully assigned to her construction, a testament to her national significance. In the original, audacious plans, she would displace a truly monumental 72,000 tons when fully loaded, mount the same massive, devastating guns as her sisters, and, despite her enormous, almost inconceivable bulk, cruise at a respectable 27 knots, a testament to the power of her engines. She represented not merely a weapon, a tool of destruction, but a powerful, undeniable statement of Japanese technical prowess, a testament to their engineering genius. But wars, with their cruel, unpredictable logic, possess a profound and brutal way of irrevocably reshaping even the grandest of dreams. In June 1942, Japan suffered a devastating, truly cataclysmic loss at the pivotal Battle of Midway, a turning point in the Pacific War. 4 of her precious fleet carriers, the Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, were tragically lost in a single horrifying day. Along with them went hundreds of her most experienced, irreplaceable pilots, and, perhaps most cripplingly, the very backbone of Japan's once formidable naval air arm. That battle, a strategic masterpiece of American planning and execution, irrevocably shifted the balance of power in the Pacific, permanently altering the course of the war. No longer could Japan realistically rely on its carriers to project power with the audacious impunity it had enjoyed in the early, triumphant days of 1941 and 1942. The crushing loss at Midway forced a fundamental, agonizing reassessment of their entire naval strategy. Aircraft carriers, with their unparalleled reach and devastating striking power, not the colossal, anachronistic battleships, had proven themselves to be the decisive, paramount weapons of modern naval warfare. The age of the venerable, majestic big gun was, with undeniable finality, ending. The dynamic, unpredictable age of the aircraft, with its aerial supremacy, had definitively arrived. The Navy's desperate planners looked at Shinano's massive, imposing hull, still tragically incomplete in her dry dock, a skeleton of what she was meant to be, and faced an agonizing, monumental choice. To finish her as a battleship meant to produce yet another gun platform in an era when it was explicitly carriers that determined the outcome of wars, a fundamentally illogical investment. To leave her unfinished, a derelict monument to a failed dream, was, to their proud and desperate minds, utterly unthinkable. Too much precious time and invaluable resources had already been invested, a point of no return. The answer, though fraught with technical complexities and immense risk, was, to them, terrifyingly clear. Shinano would be converted into an aircraft carrier, and not just any carrier, but, with characteristic Japanese ambition, the largest aircraft carrier the world had ever seen, a symbol of their unyielding spirit even in the face of impending doom. The conversion process was, by any engineering standard, radical, unprecedented, and immensely complex. The lower hull, already meticulously shaped and heavily armored for a battleship's unique needs, had to be adapted for entirely different, previously unforeseen purposes, a massive undertaking. Her armored citadel, originally designed with a single-minded focus to withstand the monstrous, pulverizing impact of enormous shell fire, was ingeniously reconfigured to support an expansive, multi-deck hangar, a vast internal space for aircraft. Where her formidable gun turrets would have proudly stood, dominating the sea, massive aircraft elevators, complex pieces of machinery, were painstakingly installed, capable of lifting aircraft to the flight deck. The entire superstructure, the island, was completely redesigned, shifted decisively to starboard in the established style of modern carriers, a stark departure from battleship design. A colossal flight deck, stretching an impressive 840 feet in length and an astounding 130 feet in width, was painstakingly constructed high above everything else, a runway for a nation's last hopes. Unlike most other carriers of the era, however, she would not be built primarily to launch vast offensive strikes to project power across the globe. Instead, she was envisioned as a support carrier, a versatile, mobile fortress that could protect entire fleets with her incredible armor, repair battle-damaged aircraft in the midst of ferocious engagements, and, crucially, carry the new, terrifying suicide planes and motorboats, instruments of utter desperation designed specifically for special attack missions, a euphemism for kamikaze operations. Her enormous hangar could theoretically accommodate a complement of 47 aircraft, with additional storage capacity for another 70 planes, carefully packed in crates that could be assembled and launched as needed, making her a formidable floating arsenal. She would serve as a crucial floating reserve, a vital lifeline replenishing the air groups of other carriers that had inevitably suffered heavy losses in the brutal, unrelenting combat. This evolving concept, a stark departure from earlier doctrine, eloquently reflected the rapidly changing Japanese strategy, a move born of weakness rather than strength. By 1944, Japan could no longer realistically count on massing hundreds of highly trained expert pilots for conventional decisive battles. The experienced aviators who had so skillfully and precisely executed the audacious Pearl Harbor attack were, tragically, almost all dead, their invaluable expertise and daring lost forever. Their replacements were, without exception, inadequately trained, often possessing less than 50 hours of actual flight time, a woefully insufficient amount before being tragically thrust into the maelstrom of combat. Instead of relying on conventional air power, a resource they no longer possessed in sufficient quantity or quality, Japan desperately sought weapons of shock, terror, and utter desperation. Shinano would become their last desperate arsenal, a floating monument to a dying empire's final gamble. The level of secrecy that surrounded her construction was, by any historical standard, truly unprecedented, a testament to the fear and paranoia gripping the Japanese high command. Fearing with intense apprehension that American bombers would inevitably discover and destroy the ship before she ever had a chance to sail, the Navy took extraordinary, almost draconian measures to hide her. The massive dry dock where Shinano was being painstakingly built was entirely enclosed under a truly colossal concrete roof, an impenetrable shield designed to obscure her from the prying, omnipresent eyes in the sky. This enormous roof, supported by immense steel girders, transformed the entire construction site into a vast, enclosed, and highly secretive workshop, a hidden world unto itself. The thousands of workmen who toiled ceaselessly on her immense hull were strictly confined within the shipyard's perimeter. They lived in cramped Spartan barracks on site, strictly forbidden to leave or communicate in any way with the outside world, effectively prisoners of their own creation. They were explicitly threatened with harsh prison sentences, or even worse, if they dared to reveal a single word, a single detail of what they were painstakingly building. Military police, stern and unyielding, constantly patrolled the extensive perimeter, ensuring absolute secrecy. Not a single photograph of Shinano under construction was permitted to leave the tightly controlled yard, ensuring no intelligence leaks. Even within the highest echelons of the Imperial Navy, knowledge of Shinano's existence and specifications was tightly, meticulously controlled, a need-to-know basis. Only a select, trusted few officers were permitted to know her true specifications. Documents referring to her used cryptic code names designed to confuse and mislead. When she finally did emerge, a colossal apparition from the depths of secrecy, she would be a profound surprise not only to the unsuspecting Americans, but even to many of her own countrymen, a testament to the success of the extraordinary veil of secrecy. However, this extreme level of secrecy, while initially effective, ironically created its own unforeseen and ultimately fatal problems. Suppliers delivering critical materials often had no idea what grand project they were unwittingly contributing to, leading to inefficiencies and misunderstandings. Crucial coordination between different, isolated departments suffered immensely, leading to a fragmented and less efficient construction process. Mistakes that might have been easily caught through normal oversight, typical quality control, and open communication went tragically unnoticed, festering in the dark. Her design, ambitious and audacious, pushed the very limits of contemporary naval engineering. With a full load displacement of 71,190 tons, Shinano quite literally dwarfed every other aircraft carrier afloat, a true giant among ships. Her armored flight deck, a rarity among carriers of the era and a testament to her battleship heritage, was designed to resist 1,000-pound bombs, a formidable defensive measure. Her armored belt, an impressive 8 inches thick at the waterline, afforded her a level of protection previously unknown in carrier design, making her conceptually immune to many conventional attacks. Her immense hangar was thoughtfully divided by heavy armor intersections, specifically intended to prevent a single bomb or torpedo from crippling the entire ship, a layered defense. Her powerful engines, 4 massive steam turbines collectively producing a staggering 150,000 shaft horsepower, were meticulously designed to drive her at impressive speeds of 27 knots despite her immense bulk, a true feat of engineering. Her defensive armament, a truly formidable array, was also unparalleled. She mounted 16 5-inch dual-purpose guns in 8 twin mounts, capable of engaging both surface and air targets with devastating accuracy. Over 125 25mm anti-aircraft guns were strategically distributed across her vast hull, creating overlapping, interlocking fields of fire, a veritable curtain of steel against attacking aircraft. Furthermore, 12 28-barrel rocket launchers could fire salvos of explosive shells skyward, designed to create an almost impenetrable curtain of steel against incoming enemy aircraft. In theory, with this formidable array of defenses, she would be nearly impossible for enemy aircraft to approach, let alone successfully attack and disable. Yet, for all this theoretical grandeur, for all this engineering ambition, Shinano was tragically being born into a deepening crisis, a nation on the brink. The workers painstakingly building her were no longer the skilled, experienced craftsmen who had, with such pride and precision, constructed the legendary Yamato and Musashi. Many of those seasoned, irreplaceable shipbuilders had been drafted into military service, sent to fight a losing war. Their replacements were a motley collection: conscripts, inexperienced students, and even, disturbingly, prisoners of war forced into labor. Quality control, once the undisputed pride of Japanese shipbuilding, deteriorated precipitously, a silent, corrosive decay. Welds that, under normal circumstances, should have been meticulously X-rayed for hidden flaws, were merely visually inspected, a dangerous shortcut. Tolerances that, in peacetime, should have been precisely measured in millimeters, dangerously grew to centimeters, creating structural weaknesses. The immense pressure to complete her, to get her to sea, was relentless, an unceasing, suffocating demand. Tokyo, oblivious to the realities on the ground, demanded she be ready by November 1944. A truly impossible deadline given the circumstances. Work continued around the clock, a ceaseless, grinding effort. Men, pushed beyond the limits of human endurance, collapsed from sheer exhaustion and were immediately carried away, only to be replaced instantly by others, the human cost deemed expendable. The suffocating heat inside the covered dock during the summer months was truly stifling, unbearable. In winter, workers' hands grew numb from the penetrating, relentless cold, their productivity suffering. Accidents, tragically, increased with alarming regularity. Men fell from precarious scaffolding, were crushed by shifting, massive steel plates, or were overcome by the noxious fumes from welding operations. Each death, a silent tragedy, was meticulously hushed up, suppressed by the iron hand of censorship. The war effort, the relentless push for Shinano's completion, was, by imperial decree, deemed infinitely more important than individual human lives, a grim calculus of desperation. Materials, too, were severely compromised. The special, high-grade steel painstakingly allocated for her formidable armor was sometimes unscrupulously diverted to other urgent, equally desperate projects, leaving Shinano vulnerable. Inferior, substandard substitutes were, out of necessity, shamefully used in their place. Electrical wiring, much of it imported before the war, and now irreplaceable due to the blockade, was critically scarce. When supplies inevitably ran out, improvised, often dangerous, solutions were hastily implemented. Systems that should have been robustly redundant, offering crucial backup in case of failure, tragically became single points of catastrophic failure, each a potential Achilles heel. The great ship, this monumental testament to human ambition, was being held together as much by sheer desperate determination as by sound, meticulous engineering. Despite these immense challenges, these myriad compromises and tragedies, she inexorably took shape. Month by painstaking month, her colossal hull rose higher, a stark silhouette against the industrial skyline. Her vast flight deck stretched towards completion, a future runway of destiny. Her distinctive island superstructure, the command center, grew majestically from her starboard side, slowly asserting its presence. To those who saw her, even in her incomplete state, she was an absolutely awe-inspiring sight, a true marvel. Workers would, despite their bone-deep exhaustion, pause momentarily in their arduous labor to simply stare, transfixed, at the sheer immensity of what they were building, an almost impossible creation. She was not merely a ship. She was, to many, a floating city, a staggering monument to the indomitable, if perhaps misguided, human ambition. On the crisp morning of October 8, 1944, the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal stood braced for a moment of profound national triumph. After 4 grueling years of secretive construction, Japan's greatest, most audacious shipbuilding gamble was, for the very first time, to finally touch the water, a symbolic moment of birth. The atmosphere, despite the omnipresent shadow of war, was electric with anticipation, a vibrant hum of nervous excitement. This was to be more than a mere launch. It was intended to be a powerful, defiant symbol of Japanese resilience, irrefutable proof that even under the constant, punishing bombardment and the suffocating naval blockade, the Empire could still, against all odds, create wonders, monumental feats of engineering. The day, pregnant with expectation, began with an elaborate, meticulously choreographed ceremony, steeped in ancient tradition. At the break of dawn, Shinto priests, resplendent in their immaculate white robes, arrived to conduct solemn purification rites, invoking ancient spirits. They waved streaming, delicate wands of white paper, chanted ancient prayers in sonorous voices, and sprinkled sacred salt to purify the ground, consecrating the space. A makeshift altar, simple yet profoundly significant, was erected near the colossal bow of the ship, and offerings of pure rice, fresh fish, and ceremonial sake were reverently placed before it, symbols of abundance and protection. The priests, their voices echoing in the vast, open space, earnestly called upon the kami, the revered spirits of water, wind, and steel, to protect the magnificent vessel and to grant her glorious victory in the battles to come. High-ranking naval officers, their chests resplendent with heavy, gleaming medals, arrived in their impeccable dress uniforms, their faces a mixture of pride and grim determination. Esteemed representatives from the imperial household were also present, lending an aura of national significance. Workers, their bodies utterly exhausted from years of relentless, back-breaking labor, were given crisp, new clothes for the auspicious occasion, a rare gesture of appreciation. They stood in neat, disciplined ranks, their collective pride momentarily overcoming the crushing weight of their fatigue, a fleeting moment of shared triumph. Bands played stirring martial music, their brass instruments gleaming in the morning light. Flags, emblazoned with the iconic rising sun, flew proudly from every available point, snapping in the brisk sea breeze. The massive concrete roof that had so meticulously hidden Shinano from prying eyes for so long had been partially removed, allowing shafts of glorious sunlight to finally illuminate her colossal hull, revealing her majestic form for the first time. The launch plan, meticulously designed, was precise and well rehearsed. Dry dock number 6 would be slowly and carefully flooded through controlled valves, a deliberate, gradual process. As the water rose, Shinano would, in theory, gently lift from her building blocks and float free, a majestic leviathan taking her first breath. She would then be carefully guided by powerful tugboats to a fitting-out pier, where her final, critical equipment would be painstakingly installed. It was a routine procedure, one the shipyard had performed literally hundreds of times before, with flawless execution. What, they wondered with an almost naive optimism, could have possibly go wrong? At precisely 10:30 a.m., the fateful order was given to begin the flooding. Workers, their movements precise and practiced, turned the enormous valve wheels, and seawater, cold and indifferent, began its inexorable flow into the dock. At first, everything proceeded exactly as planned, normally, predictably. The water rose steadily, inch by agonizing inch, creeping slowly up Shinano's immense hull. Spectators watched, their faces alight with expectant awe, a historic moment unfolding before their very eyes. Then, without the slightest warning, without any discernible cause, catastrophe, swift and brutal, struck. The Keisan Gate, the massive steel barrier meticulously designed to seal dry dock number 6 from the vast encroaching waters of Tokyo Bay, inexplicably collapsed. The colossal steel barrier, engineered and designed to hold back the immense, crushing pressure of the mighty ocean, failed spectacularly under the relentless, overwhelming force. Instead of a carefully controlled, gradual flooding, a terrifying torrent of seawater burst inward with an unstoppable, pulverizing force. The sound was like thunder, a deafening, roaring cascade of water that drowned out all other noise, silencing the cheers and gasps of the onlookers. In mere seconds, millions of gallons of water surged uncontrollably into the dock, a destructive deluge. Shinano, instead of rising gently and majestically, was struck by a colossal, irresistible wall of water. The massive ship, her 70,000 tons of steel, driven by an almost inconceivable hydraulic force, surged violently forward like a cork blasted from a bottle. She slammed into the dock's far wall with a terrifying, grinding crash that shook the very earth itself, sending tremors through the entire shipyard. Windows shattered a quarter-mile away, their glass fragments raining down like deadly shards. Mooring cables, thick and strong as a man's arm, snapped like fragile threads, unable to withstand the sudden, immense strain. The recoil sent them whipping through the air with lethal, indiscriminate force. One cable, a cruel instrument of fate, decapitated a worker instantly. Another, in its deadly arc, crushed 3 more men against a massive crane, ending their lives in an instant. The great hull, a gargantuan pendulum of destruction, rebounded violently from the impact and swung sideways, her stern smashing into the dock's side wall with a sickening crunch. She seesawed back and forth, an uncontrolled, massive pendulum of devastation, crushing everything in her path, a literal instrument of death. For long, agonizing minutes, absolute, unbridled chaos reigned supreme. Workers, gripped by sheer terror, fled in unadulterated panic, some diving instinctively into the churning, tumultuous water to escape the lethal arc of the swinging hull. Others were mercilessly swept away by the raging torrent, lost in the maelstrom. Officers, their voices hoarse with desperation, shouted futile orders that no one could possibly hear over the deafening roar of the surging water. The carefully choreographed, majestic ceremony had, with horrifying swiftness, devolved into an unmitigated disaster. The band's instruments lay scattered and broken, silent witnesses to the chaos. Flags, once proudly displayed, were torn away, shredded by the wind and water. The solemn Shinto altar, once a focal point of reverence, was smashed to splinters, its offerings scattered. When the raging water finally stabilized and Shinano eventually came to a shuddering rest, the full extent of the damage was grimly surveyed. Miraculously, despite the unimaginable violence of the event, no fundamental, irreparable structural damage had occurred to the ship herself. Her colossal hull bore some dents and scrapes, twisted fittings and broken railings, but her core integrity, amazingly, remained intact. The human cost, however, was an entirely different, far more tragic matter. 17 workers, innocent victims of a flawed design and a moment of bad luck, were dead. 43 more were injured, some grievously. Some bodies, tragically, were never recovered, swept out to sea or crushed beyond any recognition. But perhaps the greatest, most insidious damage was profoundly psychological. To the Japanese workers and sailors, immersed in their deeply spiritual culture, ships were not mere machines, inert objects of steel. They believed these magnificent vessels possessed spirits, even souls, that needed to be properly honored, appeased, and treated with the utmost respect. A ship whose launch was marked by such a profound, violent disaster was immediately considered cursed, tainted by the malevolent influence of the kami, the spirits of the natural world. This violent, uncontrolled, and utterly chaotic launch was, in their superstitious minds, the worst possible omen, a harbinger of doom. Word of the catastrophe spread quickly through Yokosuka, a silent, chilling whisper, and then, with terrifying speed, beyond. Whispers followed Shinano's name wherever it was mentioned, sowing seeds of doubt and fear. She killed men before she even touched the sea, the whispers claimed. The ocean itself tried to reject her, to cast her out. The kami, the spirits, have turned their faces away, abandoning her to her fate. Captain Toshio Abe, a stern, intensely practical officer newly appointed to command the Shinano, who had miraculously survived the inferno of Midway, attempted with grim determination to suppress such demoralizing talk. He was a man of action, not superstition, and he had no patience for such irrational fears. In a powerful, uncompromising speech to his assembled crew, he unequivocally dismissed the accident as meaningless, a mere unfortunate mechanical malfunction. Steel and engines have no spirit, he declared with an almost defiant certainty. Discipline and training win battles, not omens, not superstitions. But even as he spoke these resolute words, he could, with a chilling clarity, see the doubt, the lingering fear in his men's eyes. Sailors, by their very nature, and the unforgiving reality of their profession, are notoriously superstitious. And Japanese sailors, perhaps more than any, especially so. Many of them, in quiet desperation, made private offerings at small makeshift shrines, earnestly seeking protection against the curse they now firmly believed clung to their colossal, ill-fated ship. The repairs necessitated by the launch disaster were, like everything else connected to Shinano, brutally rushed. New steel plates were hastily welded over the damaged areas, a cosmetic fix rather than a fundamental repair. Bent fittings were crudely hammered straight or, if absolutely necessary, replaced with inferior parts. A fresh coat of paint, a superficial mask, covered the ugly scars of the catastrophe. Within a mere 3 weeks, all external, visible evidence of the disaster had been meticulously erased, whitewashed away. But those who had borne witness to the horrifying event, those who had seen the raw, destructive power unleashed, could never truly forget. The indelible image of that massive hull slamming back and forth with terrifying force, the agonizing screams of the crushed workers, the profound, visceral sense that something fundamentally, terribly wrong had happened. These nightmarish memories persisted, haunting the men who had seen them. Work, already frantic, resumed at an even more frenzied, desperate pace. The arbitrary November deadline, a sword of Damocles, no longer loomed in the distant future. It had arrived, an uncompromising demand. Ready or not, Shinano had to sail. Safety procedures, already compromised and cut short, were further dangerously reduced, deemed expendable in the rush. The watertight doors, critical components designed to compartmentalize the ship and prevent catastrophic flooding that should have been rigorously tested under immense pressure, were merely given a cursory check to see if they closed, a tragically insufficient measure. Electrical systems, incredibly complex and vital, that should have been thoroughly inspected and re-inspected, were given only the most superficial reviews. The dangerous, almost delusional assumption seemed to be that if Shinano simply looked complete, she was complete. A triumph of appearance over reality. The crew assigned to her, a motley collection of individuals, profoundly reflected this pervasive haste and desperation. Normally, a carrier's full complement would train together as a cohesive unit for months, even years before deployment. They would drill relentlessly, day in and day out, until every single man knew not just his own specific job, but could also seamlessly fill in for others in an emergency. Damage control, the highly specialized art of saving a wounded, sinking ship, required particular, intricate expertise, a near-instinctive coordination. Teams needed to work in perfect symbiotic harmony, sealing off compartments, manning pumps, fighting raging fires, all while potentially operating in utter darkness, with the ship listing dangerously, disoriented by chaos. But Shinano's crew was, out of sheer desperation, assembled from wherever any men, could be found. Hardened veterans from already sunken ships, traumatized and weary. New, green recruits fresh from minimal, inadequate training. Even civilian workers forcibly conscripted from their peacetime lives. They were thrown together with minimal organization, a chaotic, uncoordinated mess. Many didn't even speak the same dialect of Japanese, hindering crucial communication. The officers, overwhelmed and under immense pressure, tried to conduct drills, but time, that most precious commodity, was simply too short, and the crew, tragically, too green, too inexperienced. When they attempted to practice damage control procedures, utter confusion reigned supreme. Men, disoriented and lost, got tangled in the bewildering maze of passages and compartments. Critical equipment was misplaced in the wrong locations, rendering it useless. Orders were misunderstood, misinterpreted, or simply not heard. Among the crew, the chilling talk of the ship's curse persisted, a pervasive, demoralizing undertone. Petty officers, exasperated and increasingly worried, reported that men were actively requesting transfers, feigning illness, even deliberately injuring themselves in desperate attempts to avoid sailing on the Shinano, a testament to their profound fear. The ship's chaplain, a revered Buddhist priest, conducted blessing after blessing, performing ceremony after ceremony, earnestly trying to calm the widespread fears, to instill some measure of faith. But each elaborate ceremony, rather than alleviating the problem, seemed only to emphasize the deep-seated fear and superstition, highlighting the pervasive sense that something was deeply, terribly wrong. Why, the men silently wondered, did the ship require so many blessings if nothing was truly amiss? November arrived, bringing with it a profound, suffocating sense of urgency. The deadline was no longer merely approaching. It had arrived, an unyielding, absolute demand. Ready or not, Shinano, Japan's last desperate hope, had to sail. The American submarine threat, a constant gnawing presence, grew demonstrably worse with each passing day. Intelligence reports, grim and inescapable, confirmed dozens of enemy boats operating with impunity in Japanese home waters. B-29 bombers, with their immense range and devastating payloads, were ranging farther and farther from their distant bases in the Marianas. It was, military strategists concluded, only a matter of time before they inevitably discovered and utterly destroyed Shinano, a sitting duck, at her dock, a national humiliation. The final weeks of preparation, a desperate flurry of activity, took on an almost frantic, suicidal quality. Equipment that should have been meticulously and carefully installed was, in the chaotic rush, quite literally thrown aboard, haphazardly secured. Crates of vital supplies were stacked wherever any available space could be found, creating dangerous obstacles, the special, terrifying weapons she was designated to carry. 50 OK suicide rocket planes, those grim Baka bombs, and several Shinoyo explosive motorboats were hastily loaded into her hangars. These weapons, themselves chilling symbols of Japan's utter desperation, seemed, in a perverse twist of fate, an appropriate cargo for a ship born of and bound for desperate circumstances. On November 11, 1944, Shinano was officially commissioned into the Imperial Japanese Navy, a grim, subdued formality. The commissioning ceremony itself, stark and somber, was a muted affair compared to the attempted grandeur and disastrous failure of her launch. No bands played stirring martial music. Few dignitaries, their faces grim, attended the somber event. Captain Abe, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, simply read the official orders, a monotone pronouncement of fate. The revered rising sun flag was solemnly raised on her mast, a potent symbol of a dying empire. She was now officially a warship, a formidable instrument of war, though hardly a ready one, certainly not truly prepared for the brutal realities of combat. The commissioning, despite its brevity, starkly revealed just how incomplete, how dangerously unready she truly was. Of her 12 colossal boilers, the very heart of her propulsion, only 8 were even partially operational. This critical deficiency drastically reduced her maximum speed from the designed 27 knots to a mere vulnerable 20 knots, making her a slower, easier target. Her advanced radar systems, a crucial component for detecting threats, were only partially functional, their capabilities severely hampered. A staggering half of her numerous anti-aircraft guns, her primary defense against aerial assault, lacked adequate ammunition, rendering them dangerously ineffective. The massive aircraft elevators, designed to swiftly lift planes from her hangars to the flight deck, had never been tested under actual load, their reliability an unknown critical factor. Most critically, many of her watertight doors, the vital barriers designed to seal off flooded compartments and prevent a sinking ship from succumbing, had never been tested under pressure, their integrity a fatal gamble. Captain Abe, a meticulous officer, painstakingly compiled a list of these glaring deficiencies that, when completed, ran to an astonishing 17 pages. He submitted it, with an urgent, desperate request, to Naval Headquarters, pleading for a delay in sailing until at least the most critical repairs and system tests could be completed. A rational plea in an irrational war. The response from High Command was swift, unequivocal, and utterly uncompromising. Shinano would sail precisely as scheduled. The naval staff's reasoning, detached from the grim realities of the ship, was as much profoundly political as it was military. Word of the supercarrier's existence, they argued, was dangerously spreading, whispers threatening to pierce the veil of secrecy. She needed to be revealed to the world as a powerful symbol of Japanese strength and defiance, not discovered, humiliated as a bombed-out wreck in her dry dock, a crushing blow to national morale. The sailing orders, once given, were specific, unambiguous, and absolute. Shinano would depart Yokosuka on the night of November 28th, steam south along the perilous coast, and eventually reach the relative safety of Kure Naval Base, deep within the inland sea. There, protected from the constant menace of submarines by narrow, easily guarded straits, and from the devastating reach of American bombers by sheer distance, she would, theoretically, complete her critical fitting out and final preparations. The voyage, a mere dash for safety, was estimated to take only about 20 hours, a fleeting journey. What, they wondered with a dangerous, blind optimism, could possibly go wrong in a mere 20 hours? The crew, a mix of green recruit and weary veterans, prepared for the voyage with a potent, contradictory mixture of deep pride and profound dread. They were sailing on the world's largest warship, a true technological marvel, a testament to human ingenuity. Yet, they were also acutely aware they were sailing on an unfinished ship, with an alarmingly untrained crew, many of whom, in their hearts, firmly believed her cursed by malevolent spirits. Last letters, poignant and desperate, were written home, sealed with a silent prayer. Personal effects, treasured mementos from another life, were meticulously stowed away, a fragile hope of return. Some men, seeking spiritual comfort, visited Shinto shrines, leaving offerings and whispered prayers for protection. Others, seeking a more immediate, if temporary, oblivion, got drunk on sake, trying to drown their gnawing fears in alcohol, a desperate attempt to escape the chilling reality. The escort for this vital, high-stakes voyage was, by any naval standard, tragically minimal, dangerously inadequate. Just 3 destroyers, Isokaze, Yukikaze, and Hamikaze. All 3 were battle-hardened veterans of numerous brutal engagements, their crews experienced, but their ships worn, scarred, and nearing the end of their operational lives. Their crucial radar and sonar systems, essential for detecting lurking submarines, had been damaged in previous ferocious engagements and had only been partially, inadequately repaired due to resource shortages. They would have to rely far more on diligent lookouts, straining their eyes in the darkness, than on unreliable, faulty instruments. For protecting the world's largest, most vulnerable aircraft carrier, it seemed not just inadequate, but an almost suicidal allocation of resources. But every available operational destroyer was desperately needed elsewhere, fighting a losing war on countless other fronts. The night of November 28, 1944, began with a deceptive, almost eerie calm. At Yokosuka Naval Arsenal, the massive, imposing form of Shinano, a silhouette of latent power, prepared for her fateful departure. Steam steadily built in her colossal boilers, a prelude to unleashed power. Navigation lights flickered to life across her vast, dark expanse. On her bridge, Captain Abe, his face grim and resolute, reviewed the intricate charts one final, agonizing time, tracing their planned route to supposed safety. The designated route was deceptively straightforward. South along the perilous coast, around the strategic Izu Peninsula, then west to Kure. They would travel under the cloak of darkness, a desperate attempt to avoid the ever-present threat of American bombers, and stay perilously close to shore, hoping to minimize their exposure to the relentless, unseen menace of American submarines. At precisely 6 p.m., Shinano's massive mooring lines were cast off, one by one, signaling her departure. Powerful tugboats gently nudged her colossal bulk away from the pier, freeing her from her terrestrial bonds. Her colossal screws began to turn, slowly at first, a reluctant awakening, then with gathering, unstoppable power. The great ship, this monument to a dying empire, moved under her own power for the very first time, a moment of fleeting triumph. Despite everything, the rushed, compromised construction, the cursed, violent launch, the dangerously incomplete systems, she was, to all who witnessed her, magnificent, breathtaking in her sheer scale. Her hull stretched for nearly 900 feet, a steel behemoth. Her immense flight deck rose an imposing 60 feet above the water, a flat, elevated plane of ambition. She displaced more tonnage than most harbors could comfortably handle, a true giant. She was, by any measure, an engineering triumph, a testament to what human endeavor could achieve. The 3 destroyers, small but fierce, took up their screening positions, forming a protective, if thin, cordon. Isakaze in the lead, Yukikaze and Hamikaze diligently on her flanks. Together, the four ships, a small, vulnerable convoy, headed for the harbor entrance and the vast, open sea beyond, into the waiting darkness. As they passed through the submarine nets, those final lines of defense protecting the harbor, several observant crew members, their nerves already frayed, noticed what they immediately took as another chilling, undeniable bad omen. A dead albatross, its majestic white wings spread wide like a flag of surrender, floating ominously in the dark water. A profound symbol of ill fate. What none aboard the Shinano or her escorts knew, however, was that a mere 30 miles to the south, the USS Archerfish, her engines purring silently, was just beginning her fateful patrol. The submarine had been on the mundane, if critical, lifeguard duty, strategically positioned to rescue American airmen from a bombing raid that had been abruptly canceled due to sudden adverse weather. Now, free to hunt, Commander Enright had brought his boat to the surface to recharge her vital batteries and, perhaps more crucially, to refresh the stale, heavy air within her hull. The night was, for submarine operations, absolutely perfect. Dark enough to cunningly hide their low silhouette, yet calm enough for excellent sound conditions, with just enough of the pale moon to spot potential targets. At precisely 8:48 p.m., Archerfish's radar operator, his voice a sudden, urgent whisper, called out, "Contact, bearing 020, range 12 miles." The blip on his flickering radar screen was large, undeniably steady, and moving steadily southwest at a brisk 20 knots, a significant speed. Enright, his pulse quickening with a surge of adrenaline, rushed to the bridge, raising his powerful binoculars to his eyes. On the distant horizon, barely visible through the oppressive darkness, he could make out a vast, dark mass, a colossal silhouette, and the smaller, unmistakable shapes of escorts diligently cutting through the water around the main vessel. His gut screamed at him. This was no ordinary merchant vessel, no common freighter laden with cargo. The sheer size, the remarkable speed, the presence of escorts, everything, every single detail, screamed that this was a major warship, a prize of immense proportions. "Battle stations," Enright ordered quietly, his voice calm but imbued with an undeniable authority. Throughout the submarine, men, honed by countless drills and years of war, moved swiftly and silently to their designated positions with practiced, efficient grace. In the forward torpedo room, crews meticulously checked their deadly weapons, each a harbinger of destruction. In the control room, plotting teams, their faces etched with concentration, meticulously prepared their charts and calculating boards, ready for the intricate dance of geometry. The hunt, the silent, deadly chase was unequivocally on. Enright, now fully in his element, faced an immediate pressing problem. The target, this immense vessel, was moving at a formidable 20 knots. Archerfish's maximum surface speed, under ideal conditions, was only 19 knots. In theory, the nimble submarine simply couldn't catch her prey, couldn't close the distance. But Enright, a seasoned veteran, knew from bitter experience that Japanese ships often executed zigzag maneuvers to avoid lurking submarines, and these frequent, unpredictable course changes would, by their very nature, inevitably slow their overall advance, sacrificing speed for perceived safety. If he could anticipate the pattern, if he could cunningly cut corners, he might, just might, be able to close the critical distance. For the next grueling hour, Archerfish pursued her colossal quarry at maximum speed, her 4 powerful diesel engines straining and groaning under the immense load. The submarine vibrated fiercely with the titanic effort, her hull efficiently cutting through the swells, spray breaking constantly over her bow, a white plume in the darkness. Below, in the stifling confines of the engine room, dedicated engineers coaxed every possible revolution, every ounce of power from the laboring engines. The temperature in the engine room soared past a blistering 190 degrees, an almost unbearable heat. Men, drenched in sweat, worked in desperate shifts, rushing topside to gulp precious fresh air before returning to their infernal stations, pushed to their absolute physical limits. On Shinano's bridge, her radar operators, despite the equipment being only partially functional, detected the American submarine almost immediately, a faint but undeniable blip. The equipment, rudimentary as it was, worked well enough to spot a surface contact several miles distant. Captain Abe received the grim report with a stoic, almost grim satisfaction. He had, after all, expected submarines. The waters around Japan were infested with them, a constant, pervasive threat. But he also believed, with an almost religious conviction, that he had comprehensive plans to deal with this precise threat, to neutralize it. "Signal the escorts," he ordered, his voice steady. "Enemy submarine bearing 170, distance 8,000 meters. Abe's tactical situation, despite his outward calm, was incredibly complex and fraught with danger. His colossal ship, despite her immense size and formidable armor, was, due to her incomplete state, inherently vulnerable. She carried no operational aircraft to spot lurking submarines. Her own vital sonar system was not yet functional, rendering her blind below the waves. She depended entirely, dangerously, on her escorts for protection. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that their capabilities were severely limited. The destroyer's critical sonar systems had been damaged in previous brutal battles, and, due to chronic resource shortages, had been hastily repaired with inferior, unreliable components. Their depth charge racks, their primary offensive weapon against submarines, were only partially filled, their destructive power diminished. Supplies, vital for combat endurance, were critically short everywhere. Moreover, Abe faced a profound, agonizing dilemma. If he ordered the destroyers to aggressively pursue the submarine, they would be forced to leave Shinano's side, potentially exposing his vulnerable carrier to other submarines that might be cunningly lurking in the darkness, waiting for such an opportunity. American wolf packs, he knew, often operated with one boat deliberately revealing itself to draw off escorts, creating a diversion, while others stealthily moved in for the kill, a deadly, coordinated tactic. But if he kept the destroyers close, the trailing submarine could, with impunity, shadow them, meticulously radioing their position to other boats or to distant aircraft, turning them into targets. Abe chose what, in that moment of profound pressure, seemed the most prudent, cautious course of action. He would keep his escorts close in a defensive formation and rely on his ship's superior speed and evasive maneuvers, the zigzag pattern, to shake off the persistent pursuit. "Execute zigzag pattern number 7, he ordered, his voice firm. The helm swung over, and Shinano's massive bulk, a true behemoth, began a series of deliberate course changes. 45 degrees to port, steady for 10 minutes. 60 degrees to starboard, steady for 8 minutes. Then back to base course for 15 minutes, before repeating the entire, intricate pattern. The zigzag was, without question, a standard, well-established anti-submarine tactic, but it possessed significant drawbacks. Each sharp turn cost the colossal ship precious speed and valuable distance, slowing her overall progress. What should have been a relatively swift 20-hour voyage would now inevitably take far longer, prolonging their exposure to danger. Fuel consumption, a critical concern, increased dramatically with each maneuver, straining their reserves. And, most critically, the predictable pattern could, with enough time and skill, be meticulously analyzed and accurately predicted by an experienced observant submarine commander, which was precisely what Commander Enright was doing. In Archerfish's cramped control room, the dedicated plotting team meticulously tracked each of Shinano's subtle but predictable course changes. Lieutenant Commander Robert Bobjinski, the executive officer, a man of sharp intellect and unflappable nerves, bent with intense concentration over the chart table, meticulously measuring angles and times. "She's following a standard pattern," he reported, his voice crisp and clear. "If we cut across her turns, we can gain distance." It had become a deadly, high-stakes game of intricate geometry, played out in the profound darkness of the Pacific. Shinano would execute a turn, opening the distance between hunter and hunted. Archerfish would then, with precise calculation and daring, cut the corner, deftly closing the distance once again. The submarine, despite its best efforts, couldn't match the carrier's straight-line speed. That was a physical impossibility. But by taking shorter, more efficient routes, by exploiting the zigzag, she could, with incredible skill and nerve, keep pace, remain dangerously close. It required not only precise, rapid calculation, but also an iron nerve, an unwavering courage. One slight miscalculation, one fraction of an error, and they would irretrievably lose contact with their colossal prey, allowing it to slip away into the vastness of the ocean. One detection by the alert destroyers, and they would face a terrifying barrage of devastating depth charges, a violent end to their audacious hunt. As the relentless chase continued deeper into the long, dark night, Shinano's inherent fundamental flaws, the consequences of her incomplete construction, began to tell, manifesting in a cascade of mechanical failures. At exactly 11 p.m., a critical bearing on the starboard inboard propeller shaft, a massive component, began to dangerously overheat. The colossal shaft, turning at high speed, generated an immense amount of friction that the hastily installed inadequate bearing simply couldn't properly dissipate. Temperature gauges, vital indicators of critical systems, climbed alarmingly into the red zone, a terrifying warning of impending disaster. The engineering officer, faced with a truly terrible life-or-death choice, stood at a brutal crossroads. He could continue running the shaft at full speed, risking a catastrophic ship-breaking failure that could doom the vessel. Or he could make the agonizing decision to slow down, nursing the damaged bearing, and in doing so, perhaps fall prey to the lurking, unseen submarine. He chose, with a heavy heart, to reduce speed on that specific shaft, a calculated risk. Shinano's impressive speed, once 20 knots, now dropped perceptibly to a more vulnerable 18 knots. The reduction in speed seemed, on paper, relatively small, almost insignificant, but it was, in the deadly geometry of the hunt, absolutely critical. Now, the Archerfish could not merely keep pace, she could actually, inexorably, gain ground, closing the gap with terrifying speed. On the submarine, the sonar operator, his senses acutely attuned, reported the subtle but significant change in the target's engine sound, a telltale sign. "She's slowing," he announced, his voice barely containing his excitement. Enright, allowing himself a rare, tight smile, felt a surge of grim satisfaction. The intricate, deadly geometry of the hunt had decisively shifted in his favor, a crucial advantage gained. But Shinano's troubles, the silent, insidious consequences of her rushed construction, were only just beginning, a cascade of compounding failures. The rapid, unpredictable zigzagging, combined with her inherently incomplete structure, relentlessly stressed systems throughout the massive ship, pushing them beyond their design limits. Electrical connections, hastily installed and inadequately secured, began to fail sporadically, sparking and dying. Lights flickered erratically in some compartments, plunging sections of the ship into momentary darkness. Ventilation fans, crucial for circulating air in the stifling confines, sputtered and stopped altogether. The temperature in the lower decks, already uncomfortably high, became utterly stifling, oppressive, almost unbearable. Men working in the hellish engine rooms, drenched in sweat and gasping for air, had to be rotated every 20 minutes to prevent heat exhaustion and collapse, their bodies protesting. More seriously, far more fatally, the constant, violent course changes caused the colossal ship to roll and flex in ways her incomplete structure, her inadequately welded seams, and her untested components were simply not prepared for. Seams that had been hastily, inadequately welded during the desperate rush to completion began to work open, silently, insidiously, under the immense, repeated stress. Not enough to cause immediate, catastrophic flooding, but enough, tragically, to allow persistent seepage, a silent, insidious infiltration of water. Water began to accumulate ominously in some of the lower compartments, a chilling harbinger of doom. Pumps, desperate attempts to stem the rising tide, were started to deal with it, but several of these vital pumps, themselves untested and unreliable, immediately failed. They had never been properly tested, never truly stressed, and now, under actual emergency use, their inherent defects, their fatal flaws, became horrifyingly apparent. On the bridge, Captain Abe, his face a mask of grim determination, received report after report of mounting mechanical issues. Each one, in isolation, seemed minor, almost insignificant, but collectively they painted a chilling, undeniable picture of a magnificent ship literally coming apart under the unbearable stress, disintegrating from within. He faced an agonizing, monumental decision. He could slow the ship further, drastically reducing her speed, painstakingly nursing his crippled vessel to port, but in doing so, making her an even easier, more vulnerable target for the lurking submarine. Or he could desperately try to maintain speed, risking even more serious, potentially catastrophic breakdowns, an impossible choice. He chose a middle course, a desperate compromise, reducing speed further to 16 knots and moderating the extreme zigzag pattern, hoping to buy precious time to ease the unbearable strain on his dying ship. By 2:00 a.m. on November 29th, the deadly, silent dance of hunter and hunted had continued relentlessly for over 5 grueling hours. Archerfish had, through sheer persistence and masterful tactics, closed to within 7,000 yards of her colossal target. Still too far for a guaranteed, decisive torpedo attack, but now close enough to maintain solid, undeniable contact to keep her firmly in their sights. The submarine's crew, utterly exhausted by the relentless chase, were nevertheless exhilarated, a potent mix of fatigue and adrenaline. They could, with every fiber of their being, sense that they were inexorably gaining on their immense, elusive prey, closing in for the kill. Enright, his dark eyes burning with intense concentration, meticulously studied the tracking data. Shinano's pattern, despite the desperate zigzags, was becoming chillingly clear, tragically predictable. She consistently, inevitably, returned to a base course of 200 intended ground southwest, her ultimate destination the supposed safety of Cure. If he could position Archerfish precisely ahead of that predicted track, if he could, with uncanny accuracy, predict when she would steady on that course, he would have his shot, his moment of redemption. "Take her down to radar depth," he ordered, his voice sharp and decisive. The submarine, a silent steel leviathan, slipped gracefully beneath the surface, leaving only her small, crucial radar antenna barely above water, a phantom eye in the darkness. This maneuver, while reducing her speed slightly, made her exponentially harder to spot, her silhouette vanishing beneath the waves. Now she was truly a hunter in the darkness, invisible yet acutely watching, waiting for her moment. On Shinano, the mood was increasingly tense, a profound sense of unease gripping the crew. The persistent submarine had been trailing them for hours, a chilling, unseen shadow. Why hadn't it attacked? Why hadn't it been driven off by the escorts? Some nervous officers, their imaginations running wild, suggested it was cunningly calling in other boats, coordinating a wolf-pack attack, that they were being herded into a deadly trap. Captain Abe, outwardly composed, dismissed such wild speculation, but privately he too wondered, a gnawing uncertainty in his heart. American submarine tactics had, throughout the brutal war, demonstrably evolved. They were more aggressive now, more coordinated, more lethal than ever before. At precisely 2:56 a.m., fate, in a cruel twist, intervened with brutal finality. Isakaze, the lead destroyer, her lookouts straining their eyes in the profound darkness, spotted what they believed, with desperate certainty, was a periscope off the starboard bow, a fleeting glimpse of danger. Without waiting for explicit orders, her captain, driven by instinct and fear, immediately increased speed and aggressively charged toward the phantom contact. The destroyer's bow wave rose white and frothy in the darkness as she accelerated to a blistering 35 knots, a desperate, futile pursuit. On Archerfish, the sonar operator's voice rose in sudden alarm, a chilling, urgent whisper. "High-speed screws approaching. Destroyer, bearing 340, closing fast." Enright, his mind racing, had mere seconds to make a critical, life-or-death decision. Crash dive, go deep, and probably lose his colossal target forever, allowing it to escape into the night. Or hold his depth, gamble on remaining shallow, and risk immediate detection and certain destruction. He chose to dive, but only to 150 feet, a shallow enough depth to quickly resurface, to remain in the hunt. "Rig for silent running," he ordered, his voice a barely audible whisper, a command for absolute stillness. "Rig for depth charge." The destroyer passed directly overhead, its powerful screws thundering through the water, a terrifying roar that filled the submarine with dread. Every man on Archerfish, frozen in place, held his breath, waiting for the devastating splash of depth charges entering the water, for the explosions that would rip them apart. But none came. Isakaze, in its frantic charge, had lost contact, chasing a ghost, and, more importantly, had dangerously violated Captain Abe's explicit orders to maintain formation, to protect his charge above all else. A sharp, terse signal from Shinano's bridge immediately ordered her back into position, a desperate attempt to restore order. The very moment Isokaze turned away, abandoning its futile hunt, Enright, with lightning speed and decisive action, brought Archerfish back to periscope depth. Shinano was still there, a colossal, looming shadow, still steadfastly on course, now only 4,000 yards away, an almost unbelievable proximity. The precise opportunity he had patiently waited for all night, the moment of his redemption, was finally, irrevocably, at hand. At 3:15 a.m., everything, every single variable, perfectly aligned, a cosmic confluence of fate. Shinano, as if on cue, steadied on her base course of 210 degrees, a deliberate, predictable move. She was, to the Archerfish, perfectly broadside, presenting the largest possible target. Range, a mere 1,400 yards, astonishingly close. Speed, 16 knots, slow enough for a precise solution. In the unforgiving world of submarine warfare, it was, quite simply, the perfect setup, the ideal scenario. Close enough for pinpoint accuracy, angled for maximum target area, slow enough for a meticulously calculated, highly effective solution. Enright made his final critical observations through the periscope, his eye unwavering. The colossal carrier, a true leviathan, filled his entire view, a sight of unimaginable scale, far beyond anything he had ever seen or even dreamed of. Her immense flight deck stretched out before him like a sheer, unassailable cliff face. Her distinct island structure rose majestically, like a towering building in the middle of the sea. He could discern faint lights in some of her portholes, the subtle, fleeting shadows of her escorts, the white water churning at her colossal bow. He sketched quickly, meticulously recording her strange, distinctive, rounded bow, a feature unlike any carrier described in the recognition manuals, a testament to her unique, secret design. "Final bearing and shoot," he ordered, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Make ready all tubes." In the forward torpedo room, 6 Mark 14 torpedoes, each a harbinger of destruction, were meticulously ready. These weapons had, earlier in the brutal war, been notoriously troublesome, plagued by defective detonators and unreliable running depths, causing immense frustration and lost opportunities. But the problems had, after agonizing effort, been definitively fixed. Now they were reliable, devastating ship killers, each carrying a potent 600 pounds of Torpex explosive, a concentrated force of destruction. "Set depth 10 feet, Enright ordered, a crucial, precise command. It was an unusually shallow setting, a calculated gamble, but he vividly remembered a crucial piece of advice from a senior, experienced officer. Against carriers, strike high on the hull. The damage there, if successful, would crucially affect their stability, not just cause localized flooding, a strategic blow to their very equilibrium. The fire control party, their faces etched with intense concentration, made their final critical calculations. Target speed, angle, distance, all were meticulously fed into the torpedo data computer, an ingenious analog device that precisely calculated the correct firing angle, ensuring a direct hit. The solution was checked and double-checked, verified with an almost obsessive attention to detail. There would, in this moment of profound consequence, be no second chance. "Fire one!" The entire submarine shuddered violently as the first torpedo roared out of its tube, a blast of compressed air ejecting the weapon. It immediately came to life, its propellers spinning with furious energy, driving it toward the colossal target at a blistering 46 knots. Fire 2. 8 agonizing seconds passed between shots, a meticulously timed sequence, allowing each torpedo sufficient time to clear the tube before the next one launched. Fire 3, Fire 4, Fire 5, Fire 6. In less than a minute, 6 devastating death sentences were racing through the water, unerringly toward the immense Shinano. A silent, deadly ballet of destruction. The torpedoes ran hot, straight, and normal, exactly as designed, their mechanical hearts beating perfectly. Their wakes, barely visible in the profound darkness, drew precise, straight lines toward the carrier's vulnerable hull, paths of inevitable destruction. On Shinano's bridge, her straining lookouts, their eyes scanning the black water, spotted the telltale wakes, but tragically it was far, far too late. "Torpedo starboard!" came the desperate, piercing cry, a shriek of ultimate alarm. Captain Abe, his voice a desperate command, ordered full rudder, a frantic attempt to avert the inevitable. But the carrier's massive, inert bulk responded agonizingly slowly, a behemoth struggling to change course. She had barely begun her ponderous turn when the first torpedo struck with devastating force. The explosion was tremendous, a deafening roar that ripped through the night, a colossal column of water, a geyser of destruction, shot up alongside the hull, soaring higher than the immense flight deck. The ship lurched violently to port from the sheer concussive impact. Before the stunned crew could even begin to react, before they could even grasp the magnitude of what had transpired, the second torpedo hit, then the third, and then, with horrifying finality, the fourth. 4 direct hits in less than 30 agonizing seconds, all on her vulnerable starboard side, all concentrated between the bow and the island structure. A devastating broadside. The first torpedo struck at frame 104, near an aviation fuel tank that was, by sheer stroke of luck, fortunately empty, averting an immediate inferno. However, the explosion tore a gaping hole, an astonishing 20 feet wide, in the colossal hull, instantly flooding adjacent compartments with a torrent of seawater. The second hit frame 142, utterly destroying the starboard outboard engine room. Men on duty there, caught unaware, were killed instantly as a terrifying maelstrom of seawater and superheated steam violently filled the confined space. The third torpedo struck frame 166, ripping open the number 3 fire room to the relentless, unforgiving sea, silencing its boilers. The fourth hit frame 190, rupturing yet another vital fuel tank and sending a thick, dark slick of oil flooding uncontrollably through passages and compartments, creating a profound fire hazard. For a terrifying moment, those on Shinano's bridge could barely comprehend the sheer scale of what had just happened, their minds struggling to process the rapid-fire destruction. The ship shuddered violently with each impact, but she was so unimaginably large, so fundamentally massive, that the torpedo hits seemed for a fleeting instant almost insignificant, absorbed by her sheer bulk. Captain Abe's first desperate thought was that she, with her battleship-grade armor, could surely absorb this damage. After all, she had been meticulously built with a battleship's legendary armor, specifically designed to survive multiple devastating torpedo hits. But below decks, in the dark, cavernous depths of the ship, An unmitigated catastrophe was rapidly unfolding, a silent, unseen horror. The incomplete construction, the hasty welds, the untested systems that had plagued Shinano throughout her rushed birth, now became irrevocably fatal flaws, deadly liabilities. Watertight doors, crucial for containing flooding that had never been properly tested, failed immediately, catastrophically. Some jammed shut, trapping terrified men in rapidly flooding compartments, sealing their doom. Others refused to close at all, remaining stubbornly open, allowing the sea to course freely through the ship. Seams that had been hastily, inadequately welded during the frantic construction split open under the immense, crushing pressure of the sea, tearing her apart from within. Electrical panels, soaked with corrosive seawater, short-circuited in blinding showers of sparks, plunging vital areas into darkness and adding to the chaos. The damage control teams, though bravely responding as best they could, were fighting a desperate, losing battle against an overwhelming, inexorable enemy. The men had never drilled together as a cohesive unit, their actions disjointed and uncoordinated. Orders, shouted in desperation, were confused, contradictory, leading to utter disarray. Some teams, in a futile effort to correct the alarming list, rushed to flood counterbalancing compartments on the port side, unwittingly working against other teams. Others desperately tried to pump out the rapidly flooding areas, their efforts futile. The two desperate efforts, tragically, worked against each other, creating a chaotic, self-defeating spiral. In the hellish engine rooms, the situation was utterly desperate, a grim, hopeless struggle. The starboard engine rooms were flooding rapidly, the sea surging in with unstoppable force. Engineers, dedicated to their posts, worked in rapidly rising water, battling against the encroaching sea, desperately trying to maintain power to the vital pumps, to keep the lights on. When the cold, corrosive water inevitably reached the electrical panels, explosions of sparks and arcs of deadly electricity forced them to retreat, driven back by the sheer danger. One by one, the starboard engines, once roaring with power, fell silent, dying under the relentless onslaught. The list, the dangerous tilt of the ship, increased steadily, inexorably. 5 degrees, then a terrifying 10, then a perilous 13. On the immense flight deck, aircraft and equipment, now unsecured, began to slide precariously, threatening to crash. Sailors, desperate to stem the chaos, formed human chains, a futile effort, trying to secure loose items, but it was all in vain, an impossible task. A massive fuel truck broke free from its moorings and crashed violently into the island structure, exploding on impact. Boxes of ammunition, their contents volatile, tumbled uncontrollably into the churning sea. Captain Abe, despite the unfolding disaster, maintained a rigid, almost superhuman composure on the bridge, his face a mask of grim resolve. He ordered counter-flooding to, once again, desperately try to correct the alarming list. He set a desperate course for the nearest land, clinging to the fragile hope of beaching the colossal ship, of saving her from the depths. He dispatched urgent, terse messages to naval headquarters, a final, desperate plea for help. Shinano torpedoed, position 32 and Digdiororn, north, 137 east, attempting to reach shore. But even as he issued these final, desperate orders, he must have known, deep in his heart, the inescapable truth. The reports flowing in from below decks were uniformly grim, devoid of any hope. Flooding was utterly out of control. an unstoppable force. The pumps, overwhelmed and failing, simply couldn't keep pace with the raging ingress of water. Half the crew, tragically, didn't even know their damage control stations, their roles undefined in the chaos. The magnificent ship was dying, slowly, inexorably, succumbing to her wounds. Back on Archerfish, Enright had taken the submarine deep immediately after firing his devastating salvo, preparing for the inevitable. Now came the most dangerous, terrifying moment for any submarine. The furious, retaliatory counterattack. Above them, Japanese destroyers, enraged and desperate, were racing back and forth across the surface, their active sonar pinging ominously, their crews frantically preparing to unleash their depth charges. 400 feet, Enright ordered, his voice calm but firm. Rig for silent running. The submarine descended silently into the darker, colder, more profound waters, a steel coffin slipping deeper into the abyss. Every man aboard, utterly silent, breathed shallowly, barely daring to move, straining their ears. They could distinctly hear the destroyers above, the high-speed whine of their screws, the insistent, terrifying ping of active sonar searching for them, the ominous splash of heavy depth charges entering the water, a prelude to destruction. The first pattern exploded, 5 charges detonating in rapid, concussive sequence. The submarine shook violently, rattling every man to his core. Light bulbs shattered, plunging sections into momentary darkness. Cork insulation rained down from the overhead, a dusty, disorienting shower. But the explosions, though powerful, were distant, at least 500 yards away, a crucial margin of safety. The Japanese sonar, damaged and poorly maintained, couldn't get a precise, accurate fix on the elusive submarine. More charges followed, 14 in total, a relentless barrage. Each explosion sent powerful shock waves reverberating through the water, violently rattling the submarine, but none were close enough to cause serious, disabling damage. After an agonizing hour, the sounds above them slowly grew distant, fading into the immense silence. The destroyers, frustrated and ultimately unsuccessful, had given up the hunt, abandoning their futile search for the elusive submarine. They had returned to their dying charge, a grim duty. When Enright, with extreme caution, finally brought Archerfish back to periscope depth at dawn, the horizon was utterly empty. Whatever had happened to the giant carrier, she was gone, swallowed by the unforgiving sea. As dawn broke on November 29th, Shinano was in her final, agonizing death throes. The list, now beyond recovery, had increased to a terrifying 20 degrees. Walking on the tilted, slippery decks was becoming impossible, a desperate, futile struggle. Men, gasping for breath, used ropes to pull themselves up the treacherous, slanted surfaces, their muscles burning. In the immense hangar deck, the precious Oka suicide planes, now unsecured, had broken loose from their moorings, sliding violently into each other, their volatile rocket fuel creating an extreme, pervasive fire hazard. The relentless flooding had spread far beyond the initial, localized torpedo damage, an unstoppable tide of destruction. This was the terrifying phenomenon naval architects grimly called progressive flooding, a slow, insidious, but ultimately catastrophic process. Water, finding myriad paths through compromised doors, open vents, broken cable runs, and any available opening, spread like a deadly internal cancer through the entire ship. Compartments that, according to design, should have been safe, sealed off, and dry, were rapidly filling with cold, black seawater. The sheer, immense weight of this water, thousands upon thousands of tons of it, was inexorably dragging Shinano deeper and deeper into the abyss, a relentless force of nature. Captain Abe, in a final, desperate, yet ultimately futile attempt to save his dying ship, issued one last courageous order. He commanded all engines ahead full, a desperate, suicidal attempt to drive Shinano toward the salvation of the shore, to beach her before she capsized. But with only the port engines still functioning, the crippled ship could barely manage a mere 10 knots, her speed severely hampered. She was traveling in circles, her rudder unable to compensate for the uneven thrust from her dying engines. At 8:30, Abe, his heart heavy with defeat, authorized the emergency signal. Prepare to abandon ship. It was not yet an explicit order to abandon, but a chilling, undeniable warning to be ready for the inevitable, for the final moment. Sailors, their faces grim with the knowledge of impending doom, began gathering on the immense flight deck, a scene of desperate chaos, helping wounded comrades, those who could still be moved, up from the dark, flooding decks below. Life jackets, precious and few, were hastily distributed, providing a fragile hope of survival. The destroyers, their hulls scarred by battle, moved in closer, preparing to pick up survivors from the cold, turbulent waters. Below decks, in the suffocating darkness, harrowing scenes of unimaginable heroism and profound tragedy played out in grim succession. Engineers, steadfast and courageous, remained at their posts, bravely keeping the lights on and the vital pumps running, battling the encroaching sea until the rising, frigid water drove them out, forcing their retreat. Medical officers, selfless and dedicated, worked tirelessly in tilting sick bays, desperately trying to evacuate patients, the injured, and the dying. In one rapidly flooding compartment, 30 men, trapped behind a jammed, unyielding hatch, hammered frantically, desperately on the steel bulkhead. Their agonizing cries and metallic hammering could be distinctly heard for an hour before. With the chilling finality, it abruptly stopped. The end, when it came swiftly, brutally, and without mercy. At 10:18, the list of the ship suddenly increased to a terrifying 35 degrees, a point of no return. Equipment, aircraft, and men, losing their grip, began sliding uncontrollably down the flight deck, a horrific cascade, plunging into the churning, hungry sea below. The final order, solemn and heartbreaking, came from the bridge. All hands abandon ship. But for many, trapped below decks, disoriented, injured, or simply too far from an exit, it was already far too late. The list increased so rapidly, so violently, that hundreds were trapped inside, sealed in their steel tomb. Others, desperately trying to climb the steeply tilted deck, lost their grip on the treacherous, oil-slicked surface, and fell, tumbling into the abyss. Some, in a desperate, last-ditch effort for survival, jumped from the colossal flight deck. A terrifying 60-foot drop that, for many, resulted in instant death upon impact with the unforgiving water below. Captain Abe, a man of unwavering honor and iron will, remained steadfastly on the bridge, a stoic figure of defiance. As was the time-honored tradition for a captain whose ship was lost, he would go down with his vessel. He tied himself securely to the helm, a symbolic act of ultimate dedication, determined to maintain his dignity, his rigid composure, to the very bitter end. Around him, his senior officers, their faces grim but resolute, made the same profound, ultimate choice. They sang the national anthem, their voices strong and clear, as the cold, black water relentlessly rose around them, enveloping them in its icy embrace. At 10:55, Shinano, Japan's last desperate hope, tragically capsized, turning turtle. Her immense flight deck tilted past vertical, a terrifying, impossible angle. Then, with an agonizing slowness, she rolled completely over, exposing her hidden underside. For a fleeting, surreal moment, her massive hull, normally hidden from view, was visible. Barnacles clinging to her bottom, and the stark red anti-fouling paint gleaming eerily in the morning sun. A ghostly, final appearance. Then, with a tremendous, shuddering roar of escaping air, a guttural gasp as her internal spaces imploded under the pressure, she plunged head first beneath the surface, swallowed by the cold, indifferent depths. The largest warship in the entire world, a marvel of engineering and a symbol of national ambition, had survived just 17 agonizing hours at sea. The sea where Shinano sank was, in the immediate aftermath, littered with a heartbreaking array of debris and hundreds of desperate, struggling men. Over 2,000 souls had been aboard that morning. Now, hundreds, their faces grim with terror and smeared with oil, struggled for life in the slicked, frigid water. The 3 destroyers, their crews weary and traumatized, moved slowly among them, meticulously picking up survivors, a grim harvest from the sea. But the rescue, in a cruel twist of naval tradition, was tragically selective. Naval tradition, steeped in an archaic sense of hierarchy, dictated that officers should be saved first, their lives deemed more valuable. Some destroyer captains, hardened by years of brutal, unforgiving war, chillingly refused to pick up men who showed any signs of panic or weakness, believing them unworthy of rescue. "Save only the brave," one captain callously told his crew, a grim, brutal order. The result was tragedy upon tragedy, a compounding horror. Men who had miraculously survived the initial sinking, who had fought for their lives against the monstrous ship, drowned within sight of the rescue ships, succumbing to exhaustion and hypothermia. Others, completely covered in thick, viscous oil, were too slippery to grab, their bodies eluding desperate hands and slipped silently beneath the waves, vanishing into the cold depths. The winter sea was unforgivingly cold, its icy grip a swift killer. Hypothermia claimed those who weren't picked up quickly, their bodies growing numb, their will to live fading with the warmth. When the grim rescue operation finally ended, 180 men had been miraculously saved, plucked from the jaws of death. The remaining 1435, including the courageous Captain Abe and most of his senior officers who chose to go down with their ship, were tragically dead, lost to the sea. It was, by a wide margin, one of the largest losses of life in a single ship sinking during the entire Pacific War. A catastrophic blow. For Japan, the staggering loss was utterly catastrophic. A profound blow to their already shattered morale, but it had to be meticulously hidden, absolutely suppressed. Shinano had been a state secret of the highest order. Her loss would, by imperial decree, remain one. Survivors were ruthlessly sworn to absolute secrecy, threatened with severe penalties if they ever spoke a word. Families of the dead were told only the vague, chilling truth that their loved ones had died valiantly in action, but never where, never how, never the full, devastating reality. The official records were immediately sealed, locked away from prying eyes. To the Japanese public, utterly unaware of the colossal secret gamble, Shinano had, officially, never even existed. But secrets, particularly in the crucible of war, are notoriously hard to keep. American codebreakers, working tirelessly, meticulously reading intercepted Japanese messages, learned of the tragic sinking within mere days. The name Shinano, an unknown quantity, mysteriously appeared in decoded traffic, along with her precise position when torpedoed. Intelligence officers, poring over the decrypted messages, were initially puzzled, unable to reconcile the information. They had no record, no intelligence, of a ship by that name. What, they wondered, had Archerfish actually sunk? When Enright, upon his return in December, filed his patrol report, boldly claiming to have sunk an aircraft carrier of unprecedented, colossal size, he was initially met with widespread skepticism, with disbelief from naval intelligence. Navy intelligence stubbornly insisted that no such carrier existed in the Japanese fleet. The highest they would reluctantly credit him with was the sinking of a 28,000-ton carrier, still a significant achievement, but far, far short of the staggering reality. Only after the brutal war had finally ended, when American investigators gained unfettered access to captured Japanese naval records, was the full, astonishing truth finally revealed to the world. Shinano had, indeed, displaced a monumental 71,090 tons when fully loaded. She was, without question, the largest carrier ever constructed at that time, and she remains, to this day, the largest warship ever sunk by a submarine, a testament to the audacious skill of Archerfish. Enright's instincts, his profound naval intuition, had been utterly correct, vindicated by history. His personal redemption, long sought, was finally complete, a triumph over past failure. The poignant story of Shinano's single, ill-fated voyage carries within it profound lessons that transcend the specific, harrowing events of November 1944. It is a timeless tale of human hubris and profound humility, of grand, desperate ambitions tragically undone by fundamental, insidious flaws, of how even the smallest, most unassuming predator can, under the right, aligning conditions, fell the mightiest, most formidable prey. For Japan, Shinano, a symbol of their final gamble, unequivocally represented the catastrophic failure of the decisive weapon philosophy, a dangerous, misguided belief. Throughout the brutal war, Japanese strategists had stubbornly, almost suicidally, sought single, ultimate war weapons, super battleships, divine wind kamikaze attacks, miraculous, invincible carriers, believing that one perfect instrument could unilaterally alter the course of history. But wars, as history repeatedly demonstrates, are ultimately won by comprehensive systems, by coordinated, integrated efforts, not by individual symbols, no matter how powerful or iconic. While Japan poured its dwindling resources into building one massive, ill-fated carrier, America, with its vast industrial might, built dozens of smaller but incredibly effective, resilient ones. While Japan desperately rushed incomplete, untested ships to sea, gambling on luck, America meticulously took the necessary time to train its crews properly, to test its systems rigorously, ensuring reliability. The inevitable result was tragically predictable, a foregone conclusion. The technical lessons embedded within this tragic story were equally clear, resounding through the decades. Size, without corresponding, impeccable reliability and robust, redundant systems is not strength. It is, in fact, profound vulnerability. Armor, no matter how thick or technologically advanced, without proper, highly trained damage control procedures and resilient internal integrity, is nothing more than false security, a dangerous illusion. A ship's true strength lies not merely in its impressive steel, its powerful engines, or its massive guns, but far more fundamentally in the meticulous training and unwavering skill of her crew, the uncompromising quality of her construction, the integrity of every single weld and every single seal, no matter how small. Shinano tragically failed not because her underlying design was inherently flawed, but because her execution, her construction, and her operational readiness were dangerously incomplete, rushed, and compromised. For the American submarine force, the sinking of Shinano unequivocally validated their relentless grinding war of attrition, a strategy of slow, methodical strangulation. Submarines, relatively cheap to construct, demanding minimal resources compared to a carrier, and crewed by fewer than 100 men, could, with astonishing effectiveness, destroy capital ships worth thousands of times their own cost, delivering disproportionate blows. The silent service had, with this singular, audacious act, proven beyond any doubt that it could strike anywhere, at any time, against any target, no matter how large or formidable. The age of the submarine as a strategic, decisive weapon, a game-changer in naval warfare, had truly, irrevocably arrived. Commander Enright's personal journey, his profound arc from a dark place of failure to a moment of brilliant redemption, resonated deeply throughout the entire U.S. Navy. His powerful story demonstrated, with undeniable clarity, that one failure, no matter how humiliating or public, need not define an entire career, that persistence, resilience, and sheer courage could, indeed, overcome past mistakes and personal demons. He had faced his deepest fears, confronted his past failures, and, through unwavering determination, emerged truly victorious, a vindicated leader. The Navy Cross he deservedly received was not merely for the extraordinary feat of sinking Shinano, but for the profound, unwavering determination to stay in the brutal fight, to persevere after suffering earlier, devastating defeats, a testament to his inner strength. The human cost of this tragic story, however, haunts its every detail. Over 1,400 Japanese sailors died that cold, desperate morning. Many of them conscripts, young men who had never wanted to go to war, who longed only for peace. They died trapped in rapidly flooding compartments, thrown violently from tilting, collapsing decks, or abandoned to the merciless, freezing, cold water. Their immense sacrifice achieved, in the end, absolutely nothing of strategic value. Shinano never launched a single plane in anger, never defended the homeland she was built to protect, never, in her brief, ill-fated existence, justified the astronomical resources, the precious time, the countless lives spent on her construction. Today, Shinano, Japan's last desperate gamble, rests in a staggering 4,000 meters of water off Cape Omazaki, a silent, profound tomb. She lies inverted, upside down, her immense flight deck forever buried deep in the suffocating sediment of the seafloor, her once proud hull slowly, inexorably collapsing under the crushing pressure of the immense depth and the relentless passage of time. She is a solemn tomb for the hundreds of men who died with her, entombed forever, and a powerful, enduring monument to a bygone age when nations, in their hubris, truly believed that bigger, more massive, meant inherently better, that one perfect ultimate weapon could, against all odds, change everything, alter the course of war itself. Modern naval strategists, keen students of history, still meticulously study Shinano's tragic story as a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of timeless lessons. In an age of immensely powerful nuclear carriers and stealthy ballistic missile submarines, the fundamental lessons of Shinano remain profoundly relevant, echoing through the decades. Complexity, no matter how ingenious, absolutely requires unwavering competence, meticulous training, and uncompromising quality control at every stage. Size, no matter how impressive, demands comprehensive, unwavering support systems. No ship, no matter how technologically powerful, how well designed, or how heavily armored, is ultimately stronger than the intricate system that builds it, meticulously maintains it, and skillfully operates it. The sinking of Shinano also powerfully demonstrates the profound, often unpredictable role of sheer chance in war, the capricious hand of fate. Had Shinano sailed a mere day earlier or later, had Archerfish been assigned to a different patrol zone, had the torpedoes, as was often the case in the early war, run deep instead of shallow, running harmlessly beneath the hull, history, as we know it, would be drastically different, irrevocably altered. War is not just a cold, calculated game of strategy and advanced technology. It is also, profoundly, about luck, timing, and the unpredictable vagaries of circumstance. On that dark, fateful November night in 1944, all the intricate variables aligned perfectly, exquisitely for Archerfish, allowing her to deliver a devastating blow, and catastrophically, tragically for Shinano, sealing her doom. In the years that followed the brutal war, the compelling, almost legendary story of Shinano and Archerfish, this unequal duel, became a cherished, oft-repeated legend in naval circles worldwide. Authors wrote insightful books, historians meticulously analyzed the engagement. Veterans, their voices imbued with the wisdom of experience, shared their haunting memories. Each telling, each retelling, added new details, corrected minor errors, and meticulously built the powerful narrative that we know today, a testament to human memory. Commander Enright, the man who sought and found redemption, went on to enjoy a distinguished, successful naval career, eventually retiring as a revered rear admiral. He rarely spoke publicly about the traumatic sinking, preferring to maintain the quiet professionalism and stoic reserve that characterized the submarine service. When asked about that fateful night, that pivotal moment in his life, he would simply say, with a characteristic modesty, "We did our duty. The torpedoes worked. We were lucky." But those who knew him, who understood the depths of his past struggles, understood that it meant everything to him. The profound vindication of his courage, the irrefutable proof that he belonged in command, the second chance that he had so bravely seized and made his own. The crew of Archerfish, those silent warriors, held reunions for decades, their bond forged in the crucible of war. They would gather, these aging men who had once been young, vibrant sailors, and remember their shared moment of glory, their incredible triumph against impossible odds. They recounted stories of the long, grueling chase, the unbearable tension of the approach, the thunderous, visceral impact of the torpedoes hitting home, a sound they would never forget. But they also, with a deep sense of shared humanity, remembered Shinano's crew, their fellow sailors, their enemies, who had died doing their duty, just as they had done theirs. War had, in its brutal indifference, made them enemies. Time, in its healing passage, made them all simply men who had served honorably at sea, bound by a shared, profound experience. Some brave survivors of Shinano also, after the pervasive veil of secrecy that had enveloped them for decades, finally lifted, courageously told their haunting stories. They spoke of the utter chaos, the paralyzing fear, the horrifying, indelible sight of their mighty ship, the largest in the world, rolling over and slowly sinking, disappearing into the depths. They remembered Captain Abe's final, stoic moments, standing at rigid attention as the cold, unforgiving water rose around him, embracing his fate. They remembered comrades who had, with incredible selflessness, helped them escape flooding compartments, who had, in the ultimate act of sacrifice, given up their own life jackets, who had pushed others to safety before being pulled under themselves, swallowed by the sea. In Japan, Shinano, once a symbol of immense national pride and a desperate last hope, tragically became a poignant, bitter symbol of the war's final, desperate, futile phase. Grand, audacious gestures that ultimately achieved nothing. Magnificent, costly failures that only added to the immeasurable suffering and loss. She represented the profound danger of believing one's own propaganda, of confusing mere appearance with harsh reality, of stubbornly rushing toward an inevitable disaster rather than bravely accepting an undeniable defeat. For America, the audacious sinking reinforced the profoundly democratic nature of naval warfare. The astonishing truth that 80 men in an unassuming submarine could, with skill and courage, defeat thousands aboard a colossal carrier, that patience, skill, and disciplined execution could undeniably overcome sheer size and formidable armor. It was a timeless story of David and Goliath, written in steel and torpedoes, irrefutable proof that in war, the smallest, most agile unit could, through cunning and courage, achieve a strategic, decisive victory against an overwhelming foe. The wreck of Shinano, a ghost from the past, was finally discovered in 2019 by dedicated deep-sea explorers. The haunting images they brought back showed a ship remarkably intact, despite decades spent underwater. Her hull, built to formidable battleship standards, had, against all odds, resisted the immense pressure that would have utterly crushed lesser vessels. But she lies inverted, upside down, her intended glory, her flight deck, forever buried deep in the sediment of the seafloor, a silent monument to an ambition that far exceeded capability, a hubristic dream turned into a tragic reality. Today, as nations once again compete fiercely to build the largest, most powerful, most technologically advanced warships, Shinano's cautionary story remains profoundly relevant, a stark, timeless warning. Technology advances with dizzying speed, but the fundamental human factors, the hubris, the impatience, the compromises that doomed her tragically persist. Ships are still, even today, sometimes built in haste, under immense pressure. Crews still, tragically, sometimes sail with insufficient training, lacking the vital skills for survival. Leaders still, in their desperation or arrogance, sometimes believe that one supreme, perfect weapon can, against all evidence, change everything, unilaterally deciding the fate of nations. The ghost of Shinano, silent in the abyss, warns eloquently against such dangerous hubris, against such a profound lack of foresight. The final lesson, perhaps, may be the most universal, the most enduring of all. that in war, as in life itself, the race does not always go to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, to the largest or most imposing. Sometimes, in the brutal, unpredictable calculus of conflict, quiet patience defeats overwhelming power. Sometimes, with a cruel twist of fate, the hunter becomes the hunted, and the prey strikes back with devastating force. Sometimes, a single night's action, a fleeting, decisive moment, can echo through history, teaching generations yet unborn profound lessons about courage, folly, and the razor-thin margin that perpetually exists between glorious victory and utter, crushing disaster. On that dark, fateful November night in 1944, two ships, two vastly different vessels, met in the profound darkness of the vast Pacific. One was the largest of her kind ever constructed, a marvel of engineering, a symbol of a nation's ambition. The other, a standard submarine, possessed no special distinction, no unique claim to fame, just a determined crew and a resolute commander. When the sun finally rose, casting its first golden rays over the horizon, only one remained afloat, triumphant. That is the brutal, unforgiving nature of war at sea. Sudden, decisive, and terrifyingly final. The vast, indifferent ocean shows no favoritism to size or strength, to power or prestige. It swallows all equally, indiscriminately, keeping its dark secrets hidden in the profound depths where Shinano rests still, her immense glory forever buried. The largest warship ever sunk by a submarine. A giant felled by a predator she never truly saw, a testament to the unpredictable nature of conflict.